uses, such as Airbnb and Uber and whatever. That the code should catch up with it. But the way the code now reads, an Airbnb would not be allowed in a two-family home.
But the code was written before Airbnb
Before
was
Airbnb, right.
leaving anybody's eye. So,
Sure,
okay.
sure. So it doesn't say, but not a lodging house or Airbnb, because
Right.
Airbnb didn't exist. So, and the case, I'm familiar with that case. Actually, it was in reading that case, within the last year that I realized it is an issue. Although in that particular case, it turns on the language of your own code. And our code is very specific as to if you let out, you can only let out one room, and that it doesn't include these things. So the fact that there's a case is helpful, but would not apply to our code.
Very good. The next item is from Ann Ashison.
May I just summarize?
Sure, that'd be great. It's a long letter, so.
Anna, just in 18 South Dutcher Street. I just wrote out to put my 2 cents into the whole parking issue, and just to encourage everybody to realize that it's more complicated, that it's extremely complicated. And so I was writing about alternate side of the street parking, and on our street, there's an incredible number of times that the street cleaner comes before the time that you're not allowed to park there. So you're not allowed to park starting at 8, and there's not enough parking spaces on the street for everyone to park. So somebody is left only on one side, so it's musical chairs, and you're left without a place. And so it's very frustrating when he comes early, because then the street doesn't get cleaned. And so then you have to ask yourself, why do we need to clean the street every week? Do we need to clean the street every week? Do we need to have 2-hour time frame in which you can't park there? And if we didn't clean the street, both sides of the streets, on the side streets every week, how would we know when the street had been cleaned? So there'd have to be a whole thing of the first Tuesday or whatever the heck, and nobody will be able to keep track of that, which is why I assume it's the way it is. But I think with the DPW being so short-handed, I think it's very important, and we're looking at all these different streets almost as individuals, and trying to use street cleaning as a way to prohibit people who work in the Cosmopolitan building from parking on the neighborhood residential streets by changing it to 9. Just have to then make a very tight schedule with the DPW, realizing that it's just not fair to the residents to come before it's illegal to park there, and also it's useless because the street doesn't get cleaned.
Thank you. Then the last piece of correspondence, also from Supervisor Feiner. He would like to see a bicycle share program like they have in New Rochelle, and I guess also New York City and other cities throughout the world, come to the river towns. So he's setting up meetings with some of the folks that organize that. So we will keep our eye on that. I think I'd like to get a bike at the top of the hill and not have one at the bottom. So maybe it does make sense.
And then you just have a service that drives it up the top of the hill.
Exactly. I've been to the city a few times, watched the city bikes. They have the guys that actually use rickshaws to pull the bikes, which I think is kind of cool. And put them back into different places. I will open it up for public comment. Do you want to speak?
I was saying hi.
Just saying hi. Very good. Consent agenda. We had questions or comments on that?
I just had one question, if I may. There's a tax certiorari settlement, I assume, and Brendan's not here, Larry's not here, but I'm assuming this was all within the parameters of something that we expected, and it's conforming to the budget.
Yes, I think we actually
Because
approved
they're
these.
actually fairly large.
I think we actually approved these, actually. And then they're actually just paying them out now. So my understanding.
Because the language is approving them, I thought.
It's possible, but, well, we can wait till Bernie gets back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that that's how it's normally done, so that's, but it would have been nice just to have be able to have a verification that this isn't like a surprise.
Sure. We can wait till Brenda gets back. I think they're having a problem with the audio. Here she is.
There she is.
Perfect timing.
Consent agenda?
Yeah. Well, did you hear it upstairs, or did you just know?
We just had, we had one question about the,
The certiorari is going to be pulled, as it's not ready for the board. Ed Lambert had some questions he wanted to review, so we did not receive the resolution to Ed. We're anticipating, doing it, but it is not on, so it'll be for next month.
so we're taking, okay. So 7D comes out.
Correct.
So the question I had asked was this in the ballpark of something we'd already set aside?
Absolutely, yes.
So it was not unexpected?
It's not, no, it was anticipated.
Yeah, okay.
And I have I'm sorry, were you done?
Yes, thank you.
Just the part-time court attendant, is this a new position, 7C?
No, it's a vacancy.
Oh, okay.
It's for the person, like an armed guard, who's here on Monday morning.
Fine, that's it. I just wondered if we needed an extra one.
I would say it's new about 3 years ago.
3 years ago, but it's not a new position.
No, not a new
really.
position now, but it's relatively.
It's a replacement of someone that resigned, actually.
Thank you.
All right. So now
So-
we're done.
We get rid of D, and then I'll make a motion to approve A, B, and C of the consent agenda. Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And now we'll go back to the continuation of public hearing, consider local law amending Chapter 9, Board of Architectural Review of the Village Code to provide for standard of review on appeals from the Board of Architectural Review to the Zoning Board of Appeals. So, Mary Ann, do you want to get us up to speed? And then we have some people from the ARB here. I don't see anyone from the ZBA.
Do you want me to give you the changes over the last time?
That'd be great.
or not? Okay.
Or do you want to give the 30-second version of what we're doing, and then we can...
Yeah, the ZBA can review ARB decisions provided for in the ARB law. But there's nothing in the ARB law or the ZBA law that says what the standard of review should be when the ZBA reviews an ARB decision. And there is no standard of review with state law. Is to be determined by the municipality when they give the zoning board the authority. That wasn't done when the zoning board was given the authority, so this fills in that blank. Now, we had a public hearing on it in July, and there were a couple of suggestions that had come from the ARB and from the zoning board of appeals. And I incorporated them, plus I made a couple of other changes, so I'll tell you what those changes were. One was, since it started getting very long, I broke it up into separate paragraphs, and I gave them little headings, so that's why it's stuff that is in italics. So the paragraph headings are new, no change. Then the second change was made, and this was made at the request of the ARB, and that be that if somebody's aggrieved by an ARB decision, within 20 days, they can apply to the ARB for formal findings of fact. And then the ARB will make the findings of fact within 30 days after the request. And then the person aggrieved, his or her appeal time will run from when those findings of fact are filed, rather than from when the ARB decision is. That was put in because the minutes of the ARB, they used to be really comprehensive, and then those could be, just sent on to the ZBA. That's not the case now. So they'll do findings of fact before it goes up. And then, the next change was made in the language of the standard of review. Before it said the standard of review should be whether the ARB decision was arbitrary, capricious, and or unsupported by substantial evidence. And as the ZBA pointed out, the and or doesn't really make sense, so the and or is changed to or, so that if it's arbitrary or capricious or unsupported by substantial evidence, it can be All right, then, at the end of paragraph C, I added a sentence, any such subsequent decision of the ARB shall be appealable to the zoning board of appeals. That follows language that says, if the ZBA reverses the ARB, they should send the application back to the ARB to actually issue the approval and impose any conditions that are required, or take any other further action that might be consistent with the zoning board. But it was a little unclear whether that subsequent decision could be appealed to the zoning board of appeals, so that's why that sentence is added. Any such subsequent decision of the ARB shall be appealed to the zoning board of appeals. And then the last thing is a new section I added. Is a change to the zoning code. The zoning code lists the powers of the ZBA. And the two powers it lists are power of interpretation and the power to grant variances. It doesn't say anything about reviewing appeals from the ARB. That is in the ARB law, but as long as we were cleaning it up, I thought it should be cleaned up too, to add that the Board of Appeals shall have the power to review a decision of the Board of Architectural Review in accordance with the procedure and standards set forth in section 99 of this code, so that would take it back to the ARB chapter. And I did review these with the ARB. I haven't talked to anybody from the ZBA, but they would have received a copy of this.
They did receive a copy. That was my only question, is if they received a copy. I assume they did. I know they sent the original. They saw the original one.
And I had comments, which you
Incorporated.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard from them. But I think that the changes are very good. I think this was something that we needed to do, and I think the changes incorporated all of our discussion at the previous meeting as well as in our work session. So
I did have one question, just listening to this again, and it's probably a silly one, but it's like one of those ones that's more of a specific to the term of the art, I guess, but what exactly constitutes a finding of fact?
What the basis of their decision was.
So this would be just an expository based on...
Yeah, we found that, the thing shouldn't be approved because under our standards, a house is not supposed to be excessively similar or dissimilar, and this house is excessively similar because
they could
of
use
one.
something that's not, I'm just thinking of one of the appeals, they look back at something that was in the filing to the historic district, and they say it's not in keeping with the description of this, its contributing factor or something like that.
Yeah.
So they could.
That would be a finding of fact, sure.
So, okay, so
Anything on which they base their decision.
what prevents the ZBA from just setting that aside and doing their own mini fact-finding?
Well, because their authority is to review. They have the power to review, not to look at it de novo. The way the code reads now, without any standard of review stated as it was, they actually could look at it, what's called de novo, start over. They could look at that.
That's
But once you start them, their authority is the authority to review. Their authority is to look at whether the standard of review shall be whether the decision of the ARB was arbitrary, capricious, or unsupported by evidence. So really, they should look at that. That's not to say they're just locked into the record that was before the ARB. I could imagine something else might come up before the ZBA, but there's still the standard now. This does not. The suggestion was made that that they had to make sure that it was it could be reversed only if it was unsupported by substantial evidence before the ARB. It was just limited to the ARB. But in thinking about it, I thought, well, wait, the ZBA might look at other things. It could have been things that happened in the building department. it could have, you know, maybe the person has a, you know, something in writing. Presumably it should have been before the ZBA, but it's not like that. It's not like that, to just what was before the ARB. Generally, that's what you would be looking at, because that's what you would do.
So is the finding of fact part all based on the video record that went on in that session when that case was discussed? That's where you would go to get that? Or would the ARB go beyond that?
Well, I mean, they're not gonna look at anything they didn't look
Look
at
at,
in
right.
public in a meeting.
Right,
So
that's what
I
I'm-
guess what's on the video would be, whatever findings of fact they make would somehow
It'll
or
be
another
there,
appear in the
yeah.
video or some document that was submitted, maybe
Okay,
it
be a
was done on
transcript.
the
Right,
video,
right,
but-
right, okay, got it. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments from the board?
I think we've been going back and forth with this, and I've always thought it was, from when we first discussed it, it was a pretty important hole that needed to be filled. I guess this is still the public hearing, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so you didn't have to reopen the public
Nope,
hearing.
continued
right.
it.
Okay.
I'm just nervous about whether that, I'm going to go back to your thing about something, you know, that occurred that was outside the control or ken of the ARB that could then set off another set of, another rationale for overriding the ARB. That to me, I mean, in fact, that was the case in the house at whatever the address was down at the base of Main Street. That one of there were several major reasons why it got, I think that, if I remember correctly, one of which was that the explanation or the finding of fact wasn't robust enough, I guess. But the second was that there was in fact something that basically the building department had given approval before it had actually gone to the ARB. So there's a case where they look outside the current of things and they are
But
forced.
they, at that time, they didn't have the standard review. That was entirely within their ken at that time.
So that,
So you could look at it fresh.
So I think the real,
Because there was no standard of review stated, Mark. So if there's no standard of review stated.
No, I understand that, but
Yeah.
you're saying there's an exception. They could get, they would still have been able, even with this law right now, that exception.
Well, I think we have to let it play out, Mark. I mean, the standard is what? You can't legislate every,
All right.
I think maybe what your concern is that if it is a review based on the findings of fact of the ARB, suppose there is a mistake of fact in their findings, right? So
That's one of the.
That's one of them. So they
Or
can't,
just
they have
the
to,
fact,
so.
the fact that didn't get into the finding.
Right, but
because-
the review, as I would read this, the review has to be on the factual record as it exists. If indeed there's another fact or a different fact, when it goes back to the ARB, that can be raised. And the finding, the ZBA's review based on the ARB's record of findings of fact does not preclude, if it goes back to the ARB considering a mistake of fact or a new fact that the applicant now brings. So it can be fixed at several points along the way.
Mark, if it's any comfort, you know,
No,
this is the standard of review that a court would have in an Article 78. It's the
That's
exact-
fine.
The exact same language. And so that they deal with each case differently. The court on an Article 78 deals with them differently. Sometimes it puts in its own decision. Sometimes it sends it back and says, take into consideration this. You know, so
Okay.
each,
Yeah, so it has to play out.
yeah, let's.
But I think Travis makes a good point that, you know, nothing, especially if it's going, when it's going through that circle or circuit, you know, additional information may come up and it needs to be addressed, so, fine.
I understand your question, and it's a good one.
But there's no answer.
I don't, yeah, I know what my answer would be, but.
The alternative would be letting the review board review really review the ARB's decision with its own understanding of the facts of the appeal, and I think that would raise real concerns about the functioning and the relative areas of operation of the two entities. So I think this is one,
But that's exactly my concern.
right.
So, yeah.
So I think this best protects the integrity of the ARB's processes. It gives you enough time to write the findings of fact. It gives the ZBA, an opportunity to weigh in, and it can get reappealed. Hopefully we'll have few of those, because this will go on forever. But it's, I think the process is probably as close as we're going to get to good at this point.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So now,
So now we'll open it up to public comment.
Hi.
Hello.
Deb Hargraves, member of the ARB. I have one quick question to follow up on the law, but just to address Mark's concern. The ARB is comfortable with the language. I think the main reason being is that we want whatever decision's made to be fair to the homeowner. So if something comes up that we're not aware of, and maybe the ZBA had an opportunity to learn that, that's fair enough. I mean, we're not looking to keep the ZBA strict to our record and what we have before us. We really just want an opportunity that they make a decision and say that either they're going to set aside our decision or they have new additional facts, that it comes back to us so that we then can have a conversation with the homeowner about the new facts, and we can make sure that we apply it when we make a ruling. So we're really not concerned. I think this is a great improvement over what we have right now. The real question I have, which is more kind of just a particular, as the law is now written, when we say in 99A that the building permit applicant may request findings of fact, what happens if they don't request findings of fact and they want to appeal? Do they then just get 20 days from the date of our decision, and do we have an opportunity to submit findings of fact on our own even if the applicant hasn't requested them? Because I'm just a little concerned about the timing, because we originally came before the board saying that our biggest challenge, since we don't have anybody taking the minutes, is that we have to record what our basis of our decision is. So if we have an applicant who comes before us, let's just say deny the application. If they don't request a findings of fact, when does that clock start running?
It doesn't.
They have
So is it May?
It says they can request them, and then because when they appeal, it's within 20 days after the findings of fact are filed.
Okay, so either way they have to request. So we're always going to be put in the position of given an opportunity to submit a findings of fact to the applicant, and then 20 days thereafter is when the clock runs. Okay, that's all I really want to make sure, because we really don't want to be in that tight time frame, because it's a lot of work if it's going to be with a big project.
Well, I mean, and also, isn't it possible? Your meetings are videotaped. I suppose you also always have the ability of having the video transcribed by the same guy who transcribes the planning board meeting.
In theory, yes, but Rick could speak to that more. We tried it once, and it was a challenge. I mean, we to say the least, not all the voices were recorded. It took a long time to get.
Well, that's why you should be really careful at the meetings to make sure that it's all picked up. I know, because I review the planning board meeting minutes all the time. You just have to always say, make sure you speak into the mic and whatever. That's an important record.
Yes, it is.
It's quite apart from this thing, it's an important record to have. And you should be able to either fill in the blanks or, I mean, there's certain applicants who speak really softly. You just have to hand them the mic. And I think you'll see at the planning board meetings when I was first, and I just reviewed them for accuracy. At the beginning, it was terrible. There would be paid, just huge passages of undecipherable material. Now there's just a little bit, because the chairperson is better, or I nag them about, I'm speaking into the mic. But for reasons totally apart from this, you should do that anyway, so that if need be, you could always get the transcript.
I mean,
the guy does it, he can do it pretty
We could do,
fast.
yeah. I think the difference may be that we only request the transcript as needed. We don't see them on a regular basis. We've only seen one set, but I'll let Rick speak to that, because that's one of our main challenges, that if we needed the record, we're not entirely sure we have a complete record.
Well, I think
Thank you. Rocco Rizzullo, Chair of the ARB. As far as the minutes going, we do our best to make sure everybody speaks into the microphone and, enunciate their name properly, so at least we have that. But beyond that, I actually haven't spoke to the building inspector to see whether the minutes that we're using now, or the type of minutes that we're using now are good. We really haven't had any disapprovals, since that time, so I guess we'll see. But as long as we know we can ask for a specific drawdown of a particular application, then, we'll have all that information we need, and we can, and that's really why we need the time to do the findings of fact. One other thing, it appears, and I think Deb and I are on the same page when it comes to this, in the past, the ZBA has gone ahead and written variances. And I don't believe that in the case of the ARB, they have the right to do that. At this point, especially now that there's a very specific way about the process.
Right.
And I'm just, I just want to make sure that we're both right in understanding it, that the ZBA can only remand back to us with their findings, and then we go from there again. Is that the way it works?
Well, what they would do is disapprove your decision,
Right.
and then if they disapprove, it goes back to you.
Okay. So they it's not like,
They can't grant a
15 Main,
variance, yeah.
where they just created a variance, drew up a variance, and away they went.
Right, right.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Ann Atchison, 18 South Dutcher Street. I think that I said this probably a couple of years ago, which is that Irvington's process of getting the approval for something like a new house or anything a little more complicated than a fence or whatever, something simple, is, or windows, is very onerous on the homeowners, because there's so many months, so many meetings that you have to keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And I think that the average person can get a little confused if they're not rich enough to hire a lawyer, a land use lawyer, to represent them at these meetings. So you get into a thing where perhaps you're at the planning board where they're reviewing this whole thing of what your house is, where it's going to be placed, and how big is it going to be, and how many floors, and blah, blah, blah. And there's pictures of what it's going to look like. And then you go to the ARB and you find out that they get to say, no, your house can't look like that. And I think there just needs to be some kind of thought about the people who are doing this process. Some are developers, but not everyone who does something in Irvington needs to be a developer. I think there needs to be, we talked at that time about the ARB getting involved more at the beginning of the process, so that whole thing about, you just went through this process whereby it takes a minimum of 2 months, it's usually probably more like 4 months or 5 months before you get approval from the planning board. And then you have to go to the ARB, and then what if you start going around in circles again? And if you disagree with the decision, and now you've got another month, and then you go to the ZBA, and you've got another month, and then you go back to the ARB, and you've got another month, it just feels like it can infuriate you. And once it infuriates you, then all the objectivity of the point of having architectural review is kind of lost, and it feels a little bit arbitrary at that point. So I think we need to look at how other villages do it. I don't know who's the best example. I know Dobbs Ferry is quite different, and I know Hastings is quite different in terms of what the role of the different boards are. But I would, at this point, feel like what you're doing. I think this language is, obviously being advocated by the ARB, but I think you also need to take into consideration what you're doing to the people, and make sure that it's a process whereby people will actually not avoid building anything, or architects won't avoid working in Irvington because it's just too much trouble.
Nothing else to say there. You want-
Well, I just wanted to say one thing, because Ann, I understand what you're saying, but for you, and I know you used to be at the planning board meetings a lot, but haven't been as much in the last maybe year and a half. you'll find that many of the applications are being processed in a single meeting. Once in a while, too, and that's usually because they haven't, there's a, the chairperson and the staff have been working very hard to get them through quickly. So I would say I probably write 5 resolutions a meeting. There are 5. It's good to go. That's not to say there can't be improvement in process. But the other thing that makes Irvington a lot different from Hastings and actually any other village I ever worked for is it requires site plan approval of single-family houses. I don't think Dobbs does. Steve, you would know. It does require it of single-family houses?
No, it doesn't.
No, yeah, but until recently it didn't, and you may find the same thing there. Hastings has never required site plan review of 1 or 2 family houses. So it is different, but and we've talked about this in the past, if you want to continue to have site plan reviews.
I do think one of the changes that we are trying to get the ARB involved early in the process.
That's exactly the point I wanted to make, yes.
Well, and the planning board has done that. If it's a decision that it seems like the architecture is could affect the site plan, then we ask them to go to the ARB and try to work out anything.
Yep, and I think we're trying to get the ARB copies earlier in the same time the planning board gets them now, so that way.
Well, they always have.
They have,
There's
but they
been a
weren't given to them, so
communications issue.
they were sitting there waiting. But I think that now I think that the ARB would reach out and say, geez, there could be an issue here, and kind of proactively do that as well.
Right,
So
right.
I think that some of that is being addressed, Ann, but I definitely know what you're saying.
It's a
But I
good
do think
point.
some of it is by design. I think that I think that it's an onerous process, but while we have tried to streamline it, and I do think that once we can do everything electronically, it's going to be a heck of a lot better, and I don't think we're that far away from that. I do think that while we always try to streamline it and help the applicant, I think we also we always want to defend the neighbors as well. So it's a balance, and I think that our balance has definitely come down, making it harder to build, and I'll openly admit that, but I think that that's something that I might not say I'm proud of that fact, but I think that I think we're very cognizant of the fact that we have a village that we want to kind of keep the same way it is now, and I think that's why we have all these checks and balances in place. So,
Well, Brian, the one thing I think is important down the line, one of the things that I see with going more electronic is just bringing down the cost of filings, especially when they go beyond the 3-month, and you have to renotice and all the little minor revisions. I mean, when you have to create 18 sets of plans and they're 20 pages of piece, it adds up.
absolutely.
I was just gonna put Brian exactly the point I was gonna make, that I'm not intimately involved with this process very often, but my understanding is the ARB can be involved early on. I don't know how that gets initiated, but I think, many of you know the details of that, and I think that's an important piece of this whole desire to make things doable for the applicant and not be overly delayed. So that process of the ARB having input early on should have a big effect on the issue that you're talking about. But we digress from the public hearing.
Any other public comment? If not, I will make a motion to close the public hearing. If I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor? So I think we're ready to vote now. So if anyone objects, resolved to adopt the local law amending Chapter 9, Board of Architecture Review. The village code to provide is for standard review and appeals. The Board of Architecture Review to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Someone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I don't want to take all the comments. Next up is a resolution in opposition to the U.S. Coast Guard proposed Rule 2016-0132. As many of you are probably aware, because it's actually recently gotten some decent press, the Coast Guard is proposing creating mooring sites from Yonkers all the way up to Kingston, I believe it is, and including our neighbors in Dobbs Ferry and several in Yonkers. This would allow barges to be parked there for potentially an indefinite period. They've used the safety as the reason for this. What seems a little disingenuous to me, and I don't use that word lightly, is the fact that it's not just, if it's foggy out, they're going to moor there quickly, wait for the fog to lift, and then they're going to allow the barges back out. It's much more, to me, they're going to be using these as actual long-term parking spots. And to me, if it's going to be parking spots for oil barges waiting for the oil prices to go up so they can sell their oil more expensively, to me, that's not something that's worthwhile for many, many reasons. The biggest to me is that we've been working, as a community, as a larger community, as a nation, to clean up our waterways for at least 50 years. We've seen what a great success we've had here in the Hudson River, and this seems to me to be a big step backwards. And to me, frankly, if they just said this is what they were doing, we could still object to it, but the fact that they're citing safety actually gets me a little bit angry about it, because I don't think it is safety. I think they should have these there in case there is something happening and they need to moor. I wouldn't have any problem if they were creating moorings, but that's not how they've used them further up. I guess there's a refinery in Albany that they often sit outside of for a long time. So,
I don't think it's a refinery. I think it's a transfer point.
Transfer point, but it's they sit there for months at a time sometimes, and that's what we kind of foresee happening. And when we look to our southern neighbor Yonkers, they've spent billions of dollars and they've made big strides as well to clean up their waterfront, to make it a vibrant area. I find myself spending time there, and the amount of times I had spent in Yonkers before, say 10 years ago, I could count on one hand. Usually something I had to do, but now it's become like destination. And this again is a big step back in that as well. We obviously wouldn't be directly impacted, except if there was some kind of spill that, with the tides or whatever, would wash up on our wonderful waterfront. But to me, we could talk for the next 4 years about reasons why we don't think this is a good idea. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that we don't feel that we were noticed properly, that they've even followed their own laws in this whole process, which is
specifically. It's supposed to be noticed in an environmental review, which has not occurred. So,
and it was also very quickly done, in August. So I think that the good thing is that left and right, center, everyone is adamantly opposed to this. I think that the problem is that I don't know how much actual power we have. We obviously have our bully pulpits, and I think that state, federal, local. There's been one loud voice against this, so I'm hoping that, and this week I think I've seen a lot of citizen reaction as well, which I think is probably the most powerful. You're much more powerful than the politicians, and it's been one voice. I haven't heard anyone taking the other side. I think this is about as straightforward a resolution as we've ever passed. Feel free, anyone else to speak up, but...
I think just reading the resolution
it says
it all, yeah.
I think you're right. So I'll let anyone who wants to speak feel free. Whereas the U.S. Coast Guard is considering establishing new anchorage grounds in the Hudson River from Yonkers, New York to Kingston, New York, pursuant to proposed Rule 2016-0132, and whereas such rule would extend significantly the Hudson River anchorage ground adjacent to the city of Yonkers, village of Hastings-on-Hudson, village of Dobbs Ferry, and other locations in order to allow for increased shipping and on-river storage activities. And whereas numerous identified impacts exist, including the potential for harm to river bottom habitat, harm to protected species, impact on the value of waterfront property, reduction of business activity from tourism, loss of tax revenues, hazards to recreational boaters, the presence of volatile cargo, and the placement of potential terrorist target adjacent to significant populations. And whereas the proposal is in direct conflict with 50 years of significant effort to clean up the Hudson River and restore its natural habitats by all levels of government and numerous regional and community-based organizations. And whereas there is no direct notification of the proposed rule made to the Village of Irvington nor any of the affected communities along the length of the Hudson River as required by federal coastal zone management requirements, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Irvington strongly opposes the adoption of U.S. Coast Guard Proposed Rule 2016-0132 with the reasons cited above, and further resolved to urge a comprehensive briefing of elected and public safety officials from all affected river communities in Westchester, such briefing to include additional technical details of the proposal timelines and the status of the environmental review under NEPA, and further resolved that this resolution be distributed to Senator Charles Schumer, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Congresswoman Nita Lowey, Congressman Elliot Engel, Governor Andrew Cuomo, Secretary of State Rosanna Rosado, State Senator Andrea Stewart Cousins, State Assemblyman Tom Abenanti, County Executive Robert Astorino, and County Legislator Mary Jane Shimsky. Does anyone want to say anything else? I think you said it all.
I
Very clearly sums up.
One thing is, we got an email from the former trustee Wall, who mentions one of the names she thought should be on the list of distribution.
Okay.
So, did you see that?
I see it now. Maybe you could copy Assemblywoman Ellen JP too. That's fine with me.
Yeah, I'm not sure what district she's from, but
I'd be happy to include her on it.
yeah. And finally, I think the only thing is that Christina wanted you to
Yes,
mention her
that's the
statement.
one thing I'll say after anyone else spoke,
Yes.
is that Christina couldn't be here, Christina Gilberti, one of our other trustees, because she's unfortunately away on business today. But she wanted to also express her strong support for this resolution. She is as upset and appalled as the other four of us that were able to make it tonight. So we wanted to make sure that her voice and her name is officially added to the record tonight.
Yeah, I think this is well written. I have been reading all the emails from historic Hudson River towns, and I think, Brian, you're on that
Yep.
too. I've been in contact with John Nolan at Pace University to see what would be involved with researching the strength of a community LWRP would have in challenging the Coast Guard. So like you said, there are a lot of voices with a lot of different directions working on ways to keep this from happening. I totally support this resolution.
And you said you were getting that information from him about what it takes, or is Pace trying to?
Then they're going through all the membership and asking about that, and he's being approached. I have been in contact with to see what would be
They're still working on
involved.
many angles.
Okay.
Find out who has a state-approved LWRP and if this research would be of value. So the other members, almost all the river towns are members of historic Hudson River towns.
So I'll make a motion to approve the resolution. Someone like to second it?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And officially, Christina also supports it. So now, next is award of contract 2016-19 for two 2017 Ford Explorer all-wheel drive four-door vehicles for the Irvington Police Department. And there's questions on this. I think this is replacing previous.
There was one car, that they're gonna instead get a SUV and one SUV. So it's replacement, it's a scheduled replacement.
Whereas sealed bids were received and opened on July 27, 2016 at 11 a.m. in Village Hall as follows. Company Van Bortel Ford of East Rochester, New York, bid of $56,454. Schultz Ford of Lincoln of Nanuet, New York, $57,191. And Scarsdale Ford Inc. of Scarsdale, New York, $57,994. Whereas the village administrator reviewed the bid submitted and determined that the bid for the lowest bidder is not responsive to the specifications due to an exception from the delivery time requirement, and whereas the village administrator has determined that the bid for the second lowest bidder is in order and responsive to the specifications, now therefore be it resolved that the bid from Van Bortel Ford Inc. is hereby rejected, and further resolved that the clerk treasurer is authorized to execute a contract for purchase of two 2017 Ford Explorer all-wheel drive four-door vehicles in the amount of $57,191 with Schultz Ford Lincoln Inc. Make the motion. Can I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Next is approval of contract 2016-20 with Ann Asherson Landscape Design for services related to the Town Hall Theater Plaza project. If you don't know what the Town Hall Theater Plaza project is, we didn't have a Town Hall Theater Plaza before about a week ago. It's going to be kind of the area right out here to the left where we received a grant and we're going to be beautifying the area. We actually are going to have a whole redone area, kind of the whole approach to the Town Hall Theater which is kind of drab now. But as, I think it was part of a Tappan Zee Bridge, or
Yes, that's where
Tappan Zee
that
Bridge
grant,
replacement
right.
grant, to beautify, or to help the downtowns that are affected by the construction, et cetera. So we got a grant that we're going to be able to create a nice little area here, and then kind of extend that to the entrance of the building, which hopefully will go with our new entry to the building down the road. But this is step one, anyway.
Nice grant, nice grant.
Well, I'm 100% in favor of getting rid of all the poison ivy that's there. Get something that's native, but at least a little.
We did the research. It's
Less
historic
invasive.
poison ivy, but we're still getting rid of it. So resolved to approve contract 2016-20 with Ann Ashton Landscape Designs, Inc. for services related to the Town Hall Theater Plaza project, and authorizing the village administrator to execute said agreement. I'll make a motion. Can I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Next is authorization to piggyback on a contract for the purchase of computer-aided dispatch software led by the Village of Dobbs Ferry, which is contract 2016-22. My understanding is that the fire department was looking at this, and they really liked what Dobbs Ferry had found. So we were able to actually piggyback their hard work and use their contract. You can actually see the yes/no. It
Yeah.
basically hit everything that they liked.
I like that, those check marks.
The ultimate checklist.
Exactly right. So this is hopefully much better dispatching as well. So if there's no questions on this, and we were obviously looking to replace this, I believe.
I mean, I guess my other question I had was, they obviously going to get well, not obviously, but I assume they're going to be getting training on it, and
Yeah.
I don't know how they do their IT stuff at the fire department, so.
I'm not sure. I know Anthony Tarracone, one of the chiefs, that his job is actually IT. His day job is IT. So I know he's the guy I call whenever I have problems with my own PC. So I think I'm sure he'll get up to speed quickly, and I'm sure he'll figure out a way to train everybody on it as well.
That's great, yep.
So whereas the Village of Dobbs Ferry publicly bid and let a contract, the other thing that's nice about this is we would have had to go out and bid on this, and now we can use their bids, so it speeds the whole process along. Whereas the Village of Dobbs Ferry publicly bid and let a contract for the purchase of computer-aided dispatch software in 2016 to the lowest responsible bidder, SCM Fire Rescue Systems, and whereas the Village of Dobbs Ferry specifically allowed for the use of the contract by other municipalities in accordance with the so-called piggybacking provisions of General Municipal Law, Section 103, and whereas the Village of Irvington wishes to enter into a purchase contract with SCM Fire Rescue Systems, now therefore be it resolved to authorize the Clerk Treasurer to issue a purchase order for SCM Fire Rescue Systems in an amount not to exceed $36,000 to furnish computer-aided dispatch software for the Irvington Fire Department under the same terms and conditions as the Village of Dobbs Ferry contract. I'll make the motion. Can I have a second? All in favor?
Do we want to move to the 8 o'clock presentation and
Go back to it.
other ones?
We can do that.
Larry is-
Yeah, they're going to do that. I'm trying to fly through a few more.
Right.
Yeah, we can do that. We could put these on hold.
Oh, you want us to finish these? Oh,
I think these are pretty quick.
Okay. All right.
Did you want to quickly tell us what Capital Markets Advisors is?
Sure.
100 words or less?
Yes. We utilize a financial advisor when we do certain types of bond issues, permanent financing, there's an annual disclosure we have to have filed on our behalf, our official statement when we borrow. And the company that we've been using, it's the same company, but they were taken over by Capital Markets, which is major players out there, NIMAC, and they were purchased by Capital Markets. So the requirement is that we have a written agreement that they can work on our behalf. That's what this is.
What do they do for us?
They're financial advisors for bonding.
Bond.
So they were instrumental in doing the analysis when we did refunding last year. And if we go out to borrow, they do our official statement, all the things required. And then we're able to also put in writing what the fees are.
Resolved to authorize the Clerk Treasurer to execute a one-year contract with Capital Market LLC as independent financial advisor to the Village of Irvington for bond issuance and annual continuing disclosure requirements. Make a motion. Can I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Just before we go on from this, I just want to, You said there used to be the two big players, there's only one, so is this a monopoly market, is that what you're saying?
I'm not aware of another one in locally, so.
So
give
can
me
I
some-
suggest it's an action item just for the future, not for this year, but go, as an action item for you and Larry to try to investigate what other options we might have for the next contract round? Because it seems to me to not be in the village's interest to be in a situation where there's only one bidder for, it's not a bid, I understand, but, there's only one place we can turn to get all this stuff.
It could be someone outside the area.
Yeah,
Like,
just
I think it would be worthwhile, there'd be some research. I mean, not that we're, from the sound of it, we're not unhappy with them, but just for,
Right.
there's options, sanity sake, whatever it is.
Right now, well, we don't, I'll tell you, we utilize them for the official, for the continuing disclosure, that's $1,800 a year. Otherwise, we use them, like every 5 years when we go to permanent financing. We don't utilize them for the bands because we.
Or you don't?
No. Basically, the bids come in here. I utilize them for bands, but not to the extent,
All right, so,
we don't do an official statement for that. We send out our financial statements, so they're not doing that much work. So I can see who else is available.
Why don't we
It's
why don't we
big
keep that as a
country.
follow-up, sure.
Yeah.
It's $1,800 a year, we probably can't save that much. Let's look into it. The next one is a approval of contract 2016-24 with the Fiona Company. The Fiona Company is the woman who does all of our grant writing. We had, I think, used her for one grant, and we had written up a document for that, but this kind of extends it. She's found us many, many grants, so this is money very well spent. She's been unbelievably great finding us interesting grants and helping us tailor our applications, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is, again, this is a great one to approve.
I'm surprised she's not going for a finder's fee, percentage.
Yeah,
of the
exactly,
grant.
exactly.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't read this carefully ahead of time, but, so this is for a period of time or a specific grant or just when something comes up? How is this contract working?
It's for a year, I believe. A maximum of $10,000 for the year. It can be nothing, or it can be,
Oh,
we
okay,
find a
all
whole
right,
bunch. we
all
can-
right.
It's an hourly rate.
All right, so sorry, I didn't read it all.
No problem.
Thank you. It's good.
So resolved to approve the contract with the Fiona Company for the consulting services relating to grant work and authorizing the village administrator to execute said agreement subject to the review of the village attorney. I'll make a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
I agree, she's been very helpful.
Proposal for Municipal Audit Services, formerly Moorwood Oaks Management Associates, to undertake an expanded audit of cable and television franchise fees. I believe we had these guys in for our, was it Verizon in the past? Or we had them in for something, and now you want to have them do cable TV? We had it for telephone before, I believe?
I'm sorry, yes, we did. They changed their name, and they have found that they're expanding the scope of the audits that they're doing, and they asked if we'd like to be included in that expansion. I said, absolutely.
Yeah, so basically they go out and they try to find any money we're owed, and they take a percentage of it if they
Correct.
find it.
And they lowered the percentage of the charge back.
Whereas the contingency fees have increased and the company name has changed, a new contract is required for an expanded review of cable TV franchise fees due to the Village of Irvington. Resolved to approve the proposal from Municipal Audit Services LLC to undertake an audit of cable television franchise fees and authorize the clerk treasurer to execute said proposal. I'll make a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
They gotta work on their name, though.
Yeah, exactly. They just spent a lot of time on that. Approval of a change order to contract 2015-05 with Richard Henry Bear Architect for the Town Hall exterior restoration project. This relates to the delay in the Town Hall project. As we had discussed, the original contractor got into some issues. They basically stopped paying their subcontractors, and the work stopped. So we've since turned it over to the insurance company to kind of push things,
Bonding.
the bonding company, push it through. Part of that was we had to build our case. We had Richard Henry Bear with architects were very important on building that case for us. So much so that we were actually surprised when the bonding company, insurance bonding company said, okay, sure, you're right, and they kind of took that over, and we almost didn't lose any time from that process. And we're still going to be, right now, it seems like we're going to still be under budget, even with the additional fees with Richard Henry Bear Architect. So I think that things worked out as well as they could and from a bad situation, and a lot of the thanks does go to Richard Henry Bear Architect firm. Not leaving anything else out.
Just, his firm was the architect of record for the project.
Exactly.
I don't know if you made that
I
statement.
did not make that statement. You're absolutely right. They were working on this from early planning through, kind of reviewing the process as it went through, and were very helpful to us. As I say, getting the bonding company to take it over very quickly. So this is really the only overrun that we're finding, and it's really because they did additional work that we hadn't budgeted for. So. Anything else on this? Whereas significant delays and a lack of performance made it necessary to terminate the contract of the prime contractor on the Town Hall exterior restoration project, and whereas the delays caused by the prime contract termination has resulted in significant and necessary additional time incurred by the project architect, Richard Henry Bear Architect, now therefore be it resolved to approve change order number 1, contract 2015-05 with Richard Henry Bear Architect in the amount of $50,000, additional architectural services related to the Town Hall exterior restoration project, and authorize the village administrator to execute said change order. I'll make the motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now, appointments to the Route 9 Corridor Study Steering Committee. This is, Mark talked about it earlier, where there's another grant coming out of the new Tappan Zee Bridge project to look at Route 9 Broadway corridor from Yonkers up to the new Tappan Zee Bridge, looking to make it more pedestrian-friendly, safer for pedestrians and for vehicles, as well as looking maybe to add bicycle access. So we wanted to appoint former trustee Walter Montgomery, who's the head of the Slow Down Irvington group, Mark Gilliland, who's the trustee representative to that group, and Edward McGuire, who's a cyclist. So we thought it'd be good to get someone that isn't just walking and driving, but also riding a bike. So those are the three people that we were putting on. We're going to appoint to the steering committee.
Now, the question I had for Larry, but my assumption is this committee doesn't actually have a reason to exist unless the grant is actually selected. But the intermunicipal group, the river towns that have put together the grant, seem to have a very positive signals from the Department of
That's my understanding. Well, it hasn't happened yet. They expect it to happen. And then we'll meet probably for less than a year and hopefully come up with some recommendations. So.
Yeah.
Whereas interested residents and officials from Tarrytown, Sleepy Hollow, Hastings-on-Hudson, Dobbs Ferry, and Irvington have come together to apply for a grant to fund a study of bike and pedestrian conditions along the shared Route 9 corridor, and whereas the group is forming a steering committee to help guide the grant submission, consultant selection, and the study itself, now therefore be it resolved to appoint the following individuals to represent the Village of Irvington on the Route 9 Corridor Study Steering Committee: Walter Montgomery, Mark Gilliland, Edward McGuire. I'll make the motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you,
Can I even
Mr.
vote
Dwyer,
for
for
myself?
stepping up.
What's that?
I don't think I can vote for myself. I think I should recuse myself.
I think we'll allow it in this case.
I'd like
Just
to,
you go to more meetings. It's fine.
I'd like to thank Mr. McGuire for stepping
Yes.
up.
And the pay is the same,
Very nice
zero
of
for
him.
all of you. So.
Such a deal.
And one last thing before we move on to the Historic District the Historic Districts Committee for their guidelines is something we always like to be able to do, which is approving a new probationary member of the Irvington Fire Company. It's Stephen Inglis. So resolved to approve the following new probationary member of the Irvington Fire Company, Stephen Inglis. I'll make the motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Good luck with your training. I know there's a lot.
Did we have a second name, or was this?
No,
There
that-
was, but there's a hold up on that.
Oh, okay.
You didn't imagine that there were two names. So the Historic District Guidelines. Welcome. I'm going to take a 2-minute break myself while you guys set up. Take your time.
You're dropping your pace.
You guys all have a copy.
I have a copy. It's not in color, though. Do those pegs fit the appropriate architectural style?
We haven't really done a thorough analysis of that yet.
Fit the recommendation, yeah.
Seventh inning, right?
You guys are doing a long haul tonight. When'd you start? 6:30?
6:30.
So,
Not
yeah,
bad, it's not midnight.
We'll be out of here. Just depends how long Brian's break is, I guess.
Let me just ask, is there anyone in the audience that does not have and would like to have one of these design guide recommendation booklets? I should make copies, but in case we need more, I'm happy to make them.
It is on, you might indicate that it is online. Somebody could actually be at home and follow online the document.
That's a good.
It's Document Center View 8116. Right on the village website. And this is a draft, it's not a final.
Probably the rest.
Comment about his, his trouble with his PC. He just realized he has an email server. Probably a first question. I did. I've done a few things.
It's a process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just
I've
don't
been
know
up there,
shift
but
around on my iPad.
But the
You're
draft
fine.
work on that.
Oh, I haven't looked at it. You know, while you start to talk, I might try to pull it up and see what it looks like on my phone.
Oh, sorry for the delay. I had two of these before I came, so I didn't want to be distracted. Thanks for being here.
Good evening. I can't believe we're here. It's been 5 years since this board created formed the new Historic District Committee. And with your support and working with Connie and Larry and our consultants, we've managed a historic district that's listed on the National Register. And tonight, we're delivering to the board a draft of the guides and recommendations for your consideration. Co-chair Deb Hargraves is here, and John Malone will give the presentation. We are joined by other Historic District Committee members and our consultants, Stephen Tilley and Elizabeth Martin. We're hopeful that you'll find the guide user-friendly and that it'll be a benefit to property owners, design professionals, and builders, as well as review board members who are reviewing applications for work in the historic district. The intent of it is recommendations, not restrictions, and we believe that it will help preserve the qualities that the residents in the village find valuable in the historic district. It's got a big inspirational component and educational aspect to it, and we're hoping that we can get some guidance after you review as to what the next steps would be for our committee to do to complete the draft and to assist in taking it into public review. And I'm going to ask John to walk us through the guidelines. We're calling it guide and recommendations, not guidelines.
That's what we're calling it.
Thank you, Carl.
So the last time we met, we went through the format of the guide and looked at some initial pages, but you guys hadn't seen the whole content. So the goal tonight was for you to give you drafts. You don't have to have reviewed it all right now, but at least have a sense of what the content looks like. The guide is still broken down into the 5 parts that we discussed before, where the first part is really a educational component, as Earl said, where it defines the district and sort of gives you the history of the district. The second portion is also educational. It just sort of defines the kind of styles that are available in the village. The third section is a section that really goes to directive information, where it says you should maybe do this and not do this. And that's the focus mostly on the third section. The fourth section has to do with new structures in the district and how you might treat that. That's different than repairing or modifying an existing structure. And the last section, or the last few sections, are more support sections. So we have a section that shows how you get stuff approved in Irvington and the various steps you have to take. We have an appendix that has a lot of different resources that a homeowner or a designer or builder might use in this section, or in this process. So I don't know if you guys have specific questions, if you want us to go to specific sections, or if there's any questions that you had, or we could, go quickly through the whole document. I mean, it's a difficult format to go through each page, but we can sort of discuss different.
And I think Earl said as well, I think it's a very user-friendly. I know nothing about architecture. I actually learned a lot by reading this. And I found it incredibly easy. I didn't even have to use the glossary too often. But, I actually think the way it was presented with kind of a background of why historic districts are important, but not too much. Then also about Irvington's history, but not too much. Like, I thought it was actually I think it's a document that's not just for architects or planners, or applicants can very easily look at this and say, if I'm deciding to just replace, I just want to do a simple window replacement. It's a very easy to use document that kind of explains why you should do certain things and not do certain things. So, I mean, to me, it was very user friendly. I don't think, well, I actually read everything, I think, except for the appendices. To me, I don't have problems with specific recommendations or not recommending things at this point. I don't know if I ever will, frankly. To me, a lot of it is, I think we had an incredibly talented group of people spend a big chunk of time on it, and I think they've come up with excellent recommendations. If can one other architect pick apart a few of them, I'm sure they can. I mean, I'm sure you guys can do it internally. I don't really recommend that one, but
we have.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's why it took 5 years. I think that I thought that
nail it in at some point.
Exactly. So, to me, I thought that this was much better and much more user friendly than I ever thought it would be. I'm not exactly sure what I thought it would be, but I thought it would be much more textbooky
And legalistic, potentially. Yeah.
So, I thought this was a great kind of first draft. I also, to me, that I was always worried where this would end up at the end of the whole exercise after 5 years. And to me, it's the kind of guide and recommendations is, to me, the sweet spot, because I think that the vast majority of people who buy homes in the historic district bought them because they're in the historic district, not because they wanted to make a mini McMansion on Ecker Street. But I think most of the things that we've seen that are objectionable, and I know there's even a few examples of, kind of extensions that don't fit with the rest of the street and that sort of thing. I think a lot of it was just people just didn't know any better.
Right.
So I think that having something like this and having it readily available obviously online, but also when you come in to do a renovation or something, as simple as window or whatever. It's so easy to use that I think it can be a very excellent tool for people, and hopefully we'll make better decisions and choices, without having to have the hammer of, you can only have blue paint on Ecker Street or something, So I think that
We were hoping also that they would expedite the process to some extent. So instead of a homeowner coming in and being surprised by the architectural review board saying, oh, we'd rather you do X, you have that information up front, you make your decisions, and you would arrive in the permitting process or the municipal permitting process with that information, and we're hoping it would expedite as well.
And I think it's for a first, well, it's not really a first crack answer. But, right, yeah, exactly. This isn't like, wow, what a great working document. I have a lot of great ideas for you guys. This seems like it's pretty close to ready for prime time, I believe. So I'm not sure the best way to review kind of a document that's pretty final. I mean, maybe we go through one session to show people what we're talking about.
Right. I mean, if there's people that are interested in where we are, we can maybe go through the recommendations for the residential, just so we get a sense of what it is. But again, I think, the committee would weigh any input from the board, or if there's any concern, and also from the public. I'm not sure if we were going to pursue a public hearing process.
I think we should at some point. Maybe, I don't know if we do kind of one more meeting, and then we can even announce that we're going to have discussion on it or something when it's not August. But, I think that, even if Mark and I were talking briefly that maybe there's a few recommendations that we have questions about. Right. But I think we can do that in kind of in a public hearing kind of setup as well. I mean, we can do them tonight as well.
Yeah.
But, I think that's probably a dialogue. I'm sure people are going to be concerned that now this means that you can't do anything with your house in the historic district, which is always the concern that we've heard about. I think that kind of allaying some of those fears, and saying, look, this is a guide, and this is why things are important, and this is why we recommend you do these things. And I think having that dialogue with people is going to be great, and I think the businesses too, because I think residents typically pay attention. Maybe not as much as we'd like, but they somewhat pay attention. Where I think the businesses don't know anything that we're doing here. So I think we have to do some kind of outreach to both businesses and the residences, but especially the businesses.
Well, I think it'd be nice to flip through some of the visuals. I mean, this is a visual document with lots of pictures. And it's meant to be, as John and Earl have both said, it's meant to be readable and understandable to non-professionals, and Brian is a good test, and myself as well. I mean, I think there will be some specific things we might see, and I think we could, speak to them tonight, perhaps. It would be helpful to finish the process,
Yeah, sure.
I would just
I'm not trying to
invite.
shut down, comment on it. If there are comments that are available, I just know that you guys had it Friday, and so I'm not sure how much. But, we're willing to take comments tonight or however, by ever means you.
I do have comments later, but I like the idea of just giving, not necessarily recommendation by recommendation, but give them a texture of the document.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
because it's well done, and it's worth.
Yeah, like picking something, and there maybe two things in the residential, like it could be like the roofing. There's a lot of interesting pieces of it. So whatever your favorite part is, John.
Now, can I ask for one in particular?
Sure.
Because I it was a terrific document, I thought it was really good. But on the, go to exterior materials and trim, because that one I thought was maybe handled a little lightly, and I don't know if that was on purpose.
Oh, it was.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, so when we get to that, we can do that. Steve,
Okay.
one of the things that Steve brought to was trying to speak to a layperson and was trying to keep certain sections of it light. And I must say that the committee gave him a hard time about that, and he dug his heels in a little bit. So to hear that you enjoyed that is a good thing. I'm sure Steve is.
Hi, Steve.
I couldn't, if I were a homeowner and picked that up, I wouldn't be sure if I could replace, I could put aluminum seal, siding instead of my clapboard.
Okay.
I think you were getting at it, but it didn't come right out and say it, and if that's the case, is there a reason you don't want to come
Well,
out?
I think there are conditions where, in the end, there's the document is not the end of it. It is an ARB process, and part of the negotiation that happened between the committee, we had members of the ARB on the committee helping us make these decisions. So some of the grayness is intentional. to give the board and applicants some leeway, and there would be a good argument to make them. So I think there's going to be a sense of gray in certain areas throughout it, and I think that, you know, without the grayness, these documents tend to become more onerous and you know, lead to kind of a Nantucket town.
Yeah, okay, you answered my question, it was intentional.
Right.
Because sometimes the guidance is a little bit clearer.
Right.
Okay.
And sometimes it's, and you know, some of it may represent, and we could continue to work on those, but it may represent not disagreements, but less consensus among committee members. Too, like sometimes when you see something more gray.
Okay.
So the guide starts with a 2-page kind of pitch on why Irvington is special, and it's less specific about the guidelines, but just sort of an introduction of what people's feelings are and reactions to the village. A few pictures and sort of a combination of history, but also focusing on how Irvington is a wonderful place, and there's a reason why it's a wonderful place. Then we go to the table of contents, which is broken down into those sections. And then there is, after the table of contents, also a guide of how to use the document, and sort of walks you through the use of the document, where you focus on the introduction, the history first, you familiarize yourself with styles, and then you drop into section 3, which would give you specific recommendations.
And those colors on the side are actually purposeful
Right.
to, the person using this can just go to the colored section that that person needs.
All right, so there's 3. The section 3 that we're talking about is broken down into residential, Main Street commercial, and waterfront commercial. So there are certain recommendations that may apply to all 3, but the recommendations that apply to those specific sections have a little color bar on the side.
And the sections, that's something I wasn't seeing on my iPad version, the color.
It continues.
It's going to be a full bleed. It's
It's gonna be on the
full
edge.
blade, so it'll be
Yeah.
on the edge.
Yeah, okay.
The history section focuses on the history of the village, and also goes into the boundary of the historic district and why that boundary, what it's related to, and what was the thinking behind that boundary. It also has a description of the difference between contributing and non-contributing. We have an outline showing the district. And then there's a section on the benefit of historic districts. There's a brief thing that we've talked about here, which you started with, Brian, like it's not that people are doing the wrong thing intentionally, it's just a collection of decisions, and some of them are good and some of them are bad, and it's often driven by expediency and available funds, and you know, it's not meant to be judgmental in that way.
That was one of my strongest response in reading this, that it was a terrific document, and it managed to both set forth principles of why this is important, as well as very practical, both teaching moments in terms of what different kinds of windows look like, but also why the recommendations are what they are. So I thought you did exactly what you set out to do. It's easy to use, very clear, and very persuasive.
That's good. That's what we work on. Summary of historic styles. One of the things that's interesting in this that Steve Tilley, our consultant, sort of focused on is that most of the houses in this district are not specifically one style. So this outline of different historic styles, even things if they were built 100 years ago, might be a mishmash. So we're trying to let people know that they don't have to be slavish to any one style because they decided it's Italianate, they can't do this other thing, or that they maybe accidentally rip out some other historic detail that didn't match the original style. So we go through the major styles that are associated: Greek Revival, Gothic Revival. Some of these styles, of course, overlap in their time frames because that's how it worked. Most times, so we'll continue to go through that. Victorian, Colonial Revival, many of the houses. Thank you. And then in the commercial section, the discussion of styles is a little bit reduced. And also, it focuses on some of the some of the styles that are more prevalent, more important on the Main Street corridor, specifically on the Main Street corridor. And again, because there's a limited number of building types in the waterfront and Main Street corridor, the discussion of styles is reduced. Oh my goodness.
I swear though, that's good.
That's very good.
Usually. All right.
That would have been on the record.
Been on the record many times.
Yeah. I'll be better with that. So part 3 is where we start to get into the guidelines or the directive part of it. And the introduction of that directive part goes back to the basically the federal approach guidelines to historic preservation. And it's broken down into a language that connects with the Secretary of Interior standards for historic preservation.
John, can I ask you a question about that? That was a little unclear to me. Are these the federal guidelines, or are your guidelines based on those?
I think it was put in there as more informative and to highlight this resource at the bottom of it.
Okay.
That is, we could work on that. I mean, if that's confusing, the federal guidelines for historic preservation are different than what we're doing here. They're much more strict.
So the federal guidelines is just this page?
It is. It's just this page.
Maybe it can just be clarified by a heading on the next page, because I was.
Or just describe maybe better why you're even presenting, because what we don't actually want people to confuse what they need to do here with federal historic preservation guidelines, because that's a much heavier burden than what is being proposed here.
Yeah, just either put in a transition or fix the headings or something. I just found that
Okay.
reading over the.
Yeah, we tried we did have a lot of discussions within the committee about the language, because there's also a certain redundancy in the language of, it says preserve and then it says protect and then it says maintain, but that's the language from their guidelines. So we're trying to not, we're trying to have some reference to it, because that as a resource is one of the best resources, and it's sort of an introduction to the notion of historic preservation.
I agree with the flow, but I thought it was really critical to have that information in there.
Right.
I thought it was really useful to give a much broader foundation to it. It's like you guys just aren't whack cadets, right? You're
Right.
coming from.
And there's a long history.
Yes,
Sort of.
exactly.
And the section that we did use is rather broad best practices approach.
Exactly.
It's not prescriptive, it doesn't get into a lot of detail that the federal guidelines can get into.
So maybe we'll just look at it and try to clarify what the intention
Just
was.
language thing. I think it was good.
I just read it as these are the principles that are in
Yeah,
the,
right.
that are in the federal guidelines. They aren't any, and you have the same principles
Right.
in yours, which are the, identify, protect, repair, replace.
Right.
So really, this is, the only thing that's similar in this and federal are these principles.
Right. Right, so, I mean, we might be able to just, I think we'll take the comment, we'll see if we'll might find some way to clarify that. We have a section, so now we're in residential, so you'll see the bar will move from side to side because it's a double fold, what is that called? Landscape, where you're supposed to see both sides at once. So the roofing is the first thing, and there's a discussion of what some of the historic roof types might have been. And then you see on the second side of these double folds, if these were next to each other, there's sort of more of a historical component on the left, which sort of discusses what the different roof types would be. Then there would be some examples, and then on the right would be our recommended and not recommended. There was about 2 months of discussing whether it said, it is to some extent a do's and don'ts, but it's not. It's a recommended and not recommended. And and then also in the format, which I think we discussed, stuff that doesn't have its own, wasn't large enough to have its own section. There's little vignettes also about different. So here there's a discussion of solar
No.
rooftop.
Oh, I'm going to save this until the end. So
Okay.
blocking your.
And then exterior materials. You know, one of the things that's interesting here is there's, on this section, you get to the first point where you say, well, what is old enough to be historic? What is old enough to be valuable? There is this diamond-shaped asphalt siding, which was a cheap siding that was added, I think, was that 1940s, Steve? 40s?
Yeah, maybe even a little earlier.
A little earlier, 30s. So there's a certain sense, like, you don't necessarily need to put everything back to its original condition. You know, there's arguments for keeping aluminum storm windows sometimes. There's arguments, you know, for keeping.
I actually found that a very good point to make. I mean, it's something that you might even consider. I don't know if you don't want to beat them on the head, but maybe it needs. Well, I don't know if it needs more emphasis. I walked away with the feeling, yeah, you know, it's, you know, again, it's a case-by-case basis, and you decide what solution mix you're going to end up doing.
Right. I think you know that's maybe one of the sections that may be left a little bit gray. Just remember that you know the line of what is historic is going to keep moving forward. And you always need an argument if you do have a giant neon sign of the kicking donkey. You always need an excuse to keep it. You got to find some way to keep it, ones that are cool. You know.
Do that again.
I don't know. You know, there's a point where all the neon, you know, now if you're in certain areas of the country, the neon's protected more than anything else.
Absolutely.
You know? Porches and porticos, then is something that's really very specific to the village houses, and it goes into a lot of detail on what is valuable and what isn't valuable. Right? Windows, again, you know, there's a lot of language that people can learn from the window section. You know, the difference between a muntin and a mullion.
A lot of good Scrabble words. A lot of good Scrabble words in there.
Pop quiz at the end.
Well, like music glossary and fun.
Yeah,
I think my favorite
point to the drip
sentence-
cap. You know, the thing is about windows is they do a lot to the character of a building, and a building with historic windows that's been replaced with replacement windows really changes the character a lot, and the options to replace windows with a better quality window that matches the historic window, there's a lot more options than there would have been, you know, even 20 years ago, and a lot of them are very cost effective. Same with doors.
Beautiful photographs of doors. Gorgeous.
And, you know, all the photographs are all, you know, local buildings to the drawings or to the abstract ones. Fences and paving. And there's an interesting part, well, we can go through the other sections that these apply, you know, that we have the orange section and the blue section, but the sections that are, the recommendations that are in section 3 are really trying to be related to what the ARB has review over also. So you'll see in the appendix at the end, there's a section on landscape and a section on lighting that the committee decided to put in the end as an appendix because we didn't want confusion that the ARB had review over your planting necessarily, you know, if it wasn't a new project. So there's certain sections that have been moved out of 3 and have been tacked onto the back as more of a best practices section.
The drawings are great.
Resource.
Yes, new structures in the historic district. The focus is on scale and rhythm, and it's sort of a discussion of pattern and trying to do a new structure that doesn't disrupt the historic pattern, but at the same time doesn't try to pretend that it's an old structure.
So that, just to go back right there was that little arrow there. I couldn't quite understand what that arrow was pointing at.
One that doesn't fit in.
Yeah, but is there something that actually,
The yellow
I
arrow.
couldn't,
So what
okay.
I think what it's intended to show is if you look at the diagram, what page is that, John?
It's on page 37.
Is that if you look at the diagram above it where you're following the same datums and you're following the same lines, that when you're doing something on the street like that, that's an addition, you're still keeping the same datums, the same lines, so that you're tying it into the houses. Even though the setback might be different, it's still pulling in all the same, you know, pieces.
That one does not. It's showing you.
Is that a negative? Yeah, was that?
Actually, it does.
It's not a
Is it a, so you're saying that, as Brian is saying that doesn't, that's the one that doesn't fit, or?
It's a good example of how to make an addition, you know, on the public side of a texture, the street texture of buildings, you know, and meet the same plane without violating.
So it's a good arrow,
It's
not
a
a
good
bad
arrow.
arrow. See, that's why.
Since there's that much question about it.
I asked it, I argued
That
the
one
same
didn't
thing
fit.
with myself. This is the good or this is the bad, so I
So we'll need to
get where you're
clarify
coming
that.
from.
Well, actually,
From an architect's point of view, it has pulled in all, like, it's pulled in it has moved the massing forward, but it's respected all the datums and the forms of the surrounding content.
see, I think it worked as a teaching moment, because I first read it as, this is an example of a problem. And then I was looking at it, and compared to what you were talking about, I'm going, no, this is conforming to kind of your recommendations. It's, you know, the mass is obviously changed.
Right, I think if you look at the sketch on the following page where they put in a 3-story block of an apartment building in between 2 gable houses, that's not
That's the
respecting.
one.
It's really
Doesn't
nice
fit.
with the bad things you sketched in and you didn't take pictures of houses.
Steve's expertise on that, we thank him for that. He's like, you don't take pictures of that.
What not to do.
Do not do this, right? Move out, your neighbor.
It's very delicate.
And then there's a section on getting your project approved.
Very helpful to have that here.
Do you want to stop at that page?
I can just tell you guys,
Okay,
moving offline.
We were waiting
Just a
also,
couple of
we
things.
thought also Ed was maybe wants to.
Yeah, I went through, there's just a couple things. The main one being, and everybody should know, there is no waiver anymore. The planning board does not give waiver,
Oh.
it's site plan approval. No waiver anymore.
Okay, that's an issue. Yeah.
Oh, well, come on, couple years now, yeah.
All right, so we can,
Change the lingo.
And a couple other little
Yeah.
things, but it's not worth taking everybody's time to do.
Okay.
I'm just talking.
then we're on to,
I think it's also, excuse me, John, I think it's also important that the reader understand that these are practices that are already in place. This is not an additional requirement
Right.
due to the guidelines.
Yeah, that was obvious to us because we're all involved in it. Maybe we should put something
Yeah, maybe there should be
strongly
some
where,
sentence
you know, the
or
current
something.
process in Irvington or whatever.
Now that you bought your new house, surprise.
current process and everything, typical in Westchester County.
Yeah.
So then we're into resources at that point. And, you know, the goal is that the document will be primarily as an online PDF with live links, so then as it could be updated easily. And it really should live there if the resources change over time, if you need to tune the document up over time. That's a good way to keep the thing live and accurate.
But online, it can have the 2-page look.
Yeah, I think, you know, a PDF, right, it may not have that same, you know, I think it would make sense to have paper copies in the building department or paper copies in the library. But I think having it fixed as a paper copy and not having, you know, I think taking advantage of the live links would be good, even though the format was more related to.
You gotta have some paper.
Yeah,
gotta-
some, yeah.
There certainly should be one sitting, or maybe they can take them out of the Tiffany room, maybe should have 10 copies in the Tiffany room or something.
Which I'm sure they're gonna disappear, because actually, people go and they're like this.
They're very nice documents, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice coffee table.
Yeah, exactly. I want a nice laminated one.
Okay,
You
so,
could publish it, sell it,
Sell it, right.
you know, for a nominal fee, $5.
So are all the photographs actually
They do it
Irvington?
through blurbs, so they have to.
It's not a zoning code, I think it's a good.
All the photographs are Irvington?
Yeah, they're, I mean, you know, there may be one or two buried somewhere, but basically 99% of them are village
Free
photographs.
copies to anyone whose house appears.
You sure it's in there yet?
We're to find
No,
that out.
Now thoroughly.
So you had some comments?
I did, but I was waiting for anyone else to have any, otherwise I'll just jump in and be my typical self with this.
Expect nothing less, please.
Well, let's make it quick. First of all, you guys should be really proud of this document. It's a fine document, and people, really, I'm only half joking, people, they're gonna disappear because people would want them, you know. So I'm
Which is
trying
not
to-
an easy thing to do with design guide and recommendations in a historic district.
Especially if you got your house picture in there, you're gonna say, hey, you know, turn to page 15, that's.
My front door.
Yes, that's my
My
door.
modillion.
Okay, so real quick, I think about on the URL thing, I'm thinking in terms of, if there is a printed document, which there will be, I'm wondering if you should point to something beyond the root of the homepage. In other words, should you have a URL that goes, you know, www.irvingtonny.gov,
And then just list all the resources.
or slash guidelines, you know what I'm saying? So you go to a fixed place that is, and then on that page, it's totally malleable, but all the URLs, all the references are there. The problem is that each one of your URLs just about that go to the village site all go to the same, it goes to the homepage, and then you're there trying to search. So it's almost better to go kind of like the old Yahoo, you know, where you go to a page where everything is listed about, you know, chapter 3 mentions, and here's the 2 links from chapter 3 and the 3 links from chapter
Right,
3.
you just get a simple HTML page. right?
Exactly, and that could be updated. That way, if documents are added or move around, you haven't obsoleted the printed document.
Right. They'll bound to be broken links in here soon.
Exactly.
Right, right.
So then you got, the only thing you do about that, you got to scratch your head about, right, when you, if you're pointing out to a federal link or, you know, let's say an EPA link or something like that, how do you intermediate that? Unless you do the same thing, you just point to the village page, which then points to the correct, but, you know, you have to decide what to do on, that's kind of URL hygiene. In terms of very specific comments, okay, you had a landscape reference section, and it made a comment about how landscape activity, except if it's increasing coverage, doesn't have to go through the planning process. And I think it's actually not true if the landscape activity occurs in certain buffer areas, like Aqueduct Buffer or Broadway Buffer, and those might be the only two. But so it would probably be better to say in most cases, but confirm with the building department.
Right.
You know, just put that kind of caveat in there.
Because landscape is associated with buffering
John.
generally.
But that's not with ARB, that's in planning.
Right, that's fine.
Right.
And
But we could have just expand the discussion of landscape to make sure that people think things aren't unregulated.
Well, that's
It may point to this and say, I took down that tree because landscape's not regulated, so maybe, you could expand that section. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in certain cases, this may not be clear to the rest of the universe that it's only ARB-related guidelines. I mean, people may be reading it and thinking of it, just,
Right, that's how you treat your building.
yeah. So that one, but David does the caveat, say, go check with the building department to be sure, you know. And then, the one example about massing, and you made about, something about, I think, the new building section where you talked about, you try to keep the same setback as the existing buildings in the neighborhood, you know, so you keep the same frontage effectively. In terms of where the mass is sitting, we know that that's kind of going to throw you directly to a ZBA need for a ZBA variance. So
We did, when we last met, talk about other recommendations that we were going to offer for changes to the zone.
okay,
So
that's what I
this-
didn't want to lose. Right,
And,
okay.
yeah, that would be something that I think the committee would move to next after this. was-
Great, perfect. That's exactly what. Okay, so I don't remember if you had a link, but there's going to be some solar panel guidelines for the ARB, and probably where you had that little solar panel thing where you recommend, you probably do another link there that says for the current recommendation guidelines, here they are in detail. So in the terms of the sign code, you mentioned that it's business district sign code. It's actually for the entire village, although it's probably most appropriate for the business district, but it's.
It does, yeah, there are stuff about real estate signs and other stuff that. apply
And
to
other
all
kinds
those.
of, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And finally, you know, well, two things. One thing I was thinking about is like, and this would not be you guys, but it'd be kind of interesting to see a House or a Pinterest or something where, you know, like a board where you, examples of great new projects kind of thing, you know, like just as you, going forward, you could sort of.
Yes. Examples of good new projects in the historic district or in
Yeah.
a historic district.
Well, maybe us, you know, maybe in our district, just to you know, I don't know who would manage it. It's just kind of one of those things that at some point that, you know, it's one of those things that you could, and then people could actually, it's almost like giving a little bit of a ribbon for doing, you know, you do the good thing, we'll show it to people that, you know, hey, here's a great example of people following or making use of the guidelines. And
There is a blog or an email list that's associated with people interested in the historic district, and that would probably be a good place. And Neil was here, but we could talk about adding that to that.
yeah, I just think something that's really kind of visual, almost like the, gives you kind of like the texture of very visual presentation. Doesn't necessarily have to have a lot of verbiage. It just
And letting give people ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Those great windows, so I can do that.
And, okay, so here's the final one that I saved for last, because this is the question I'm sure you've all had. From the ARB's point of view, is this set of design guides and recommendations robust enough for their needs to manage the review of the historical district?
So that has been an ongoing discussion with our ARB member, who is also our co-chair. So I don't know, Deb, do you want to respond to it now? I mean, we tried to find that line where it gave the ARB enough direction and enough of a strong base that they could make their case. And I mean, I think we should probably get comments from the ARB on this and see if there's areas where there's continued concern.
Yes. I can just speak briefly to it. Again, that was the challenge. I mean, the hardest part of this document is now using it, and especially for those of us on the ARB. I think it's going to strike the right balance. Rick has not had a chance to look at this because we wanted, obviously, to present it to this board first. So at least my request would be that it's time for it to go to the ARB. I'd like to get their feedback if it's appropriate at this time to give it to them. We have a meeting on Monday night. I'd be curious to see what they have to say. I think it goes a long way to helping us because so much of what we're doing now is without any form of a document as to what the village believes is, you know, appropriate or suggestions of a better design. And by just being able to point to a few things, I think we can have a more meaningful conversation with the applicants, and they can also be better informed before they come before us. If the document had more meat to it, yeah, it would probably be a little bit easier for the ARB, but I personally don't think that's necessary. But again, not having given Rick a chance to look at it or the other ARB members, I'm not sure what they'll say.
I mean, I think what I see as the next step is in one of our September meetings, having like a public hearing where I think the featured speakers would be the ARB, you know, kind of the reactions of the ARB, and then open it up to the public. So obviously, you know, I think it was just released Friday. So, you know, and we don't have a meeting until a couple of weeks into September, so we have a little bit of time both for the ARB and for the public to kind of get some thoughts together. So, you know, before we finalize the document even, you know, and then, you know, hopefully we can adopt it fairly soon, because I think it's very close. You know, assuming that the ARB has to think it's,
The problem is going to be that the ARB is not going to have a full board at next Monday, so
that's okay.
Two or three of the regulars are not going to be there.
Sure. That's just August. Yeah, no, we'll definitely have, I think it's going to be about 3 weeks, almost a month, I think. We have, it's like very late for whatever reason. I think it's with Labor Day falls and then that sort of thing. So I think we have, you know, we can even push it back to the second meeting in September or something. Yeah, there's no rush after, you know, taking our time and you know, doing an excellent job that, you know, we want to tweak it. The tweaking we can take some time, and we definitely don't want to rush the ARB into not reading it fully or something.
Well, if I have it electronically, I can send it to the members of the ARB before that.
Great, yeah, we could definitely send it. We have a link or we have a PDF.
Yeah, it's
on the website.
It's on the website now, so.
So it could, I'm thinking that there are some specific things that, you know, Mark had and Mary Ann is going to communicate. So those specific little fix-ups and the little clarification about the federal regulation, that language. So if those could be done just soon, then the ARB would also, they can review this document, they'll know, Rick and Deb will know that those other tweaks are on their way. And then when we present this in September, I would think those would be incorporated by then, right? Those.
Yeah, I mean, the question is that sometimes it's best to collect comments from all interested parties, including the public, so that you don't,
Right.
2 for, 1 against. and
No,
you can
I
have that
understand.
discussion. So, I think now the board and Marianne should just give the committee the comments. I think maybe the ARB, if they have comments before the meeting even, I would give it to, I'm not sure it would make sense for us to make adjustments to the document till we collect everything.
Yeah.
And then make one big pass at it.
I think the next actual meeting is until September 19th, so we have, more than a month, so.
I think we meet on the 12th, so.
Good. So that works out well.
So would we put it on the agenda for that meeting?
I think so. If we can, obviously,
Yeah.
if people say between now and then that they're not ready, then we can always push it back. But I think let's shoot to keep the momentum going, and hopefully, again, if the ARB doesn't have time to look at it by then, let us know. But then we can open it up and we can publicize that it's on the website and things. So.
I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
One, and I'm maybe it was in there, I don't think so, but there's a couple of references to looking into the history of your house, find out what it used to be like, when you're redoing something. Is there any way, and this might be easier said than done, are there any, is it worth making suggestions about how you might look into what your house was like?
Like this, yeah, where would you go to find out?
Where would you go to find out what it used to be? It wouldn't necessarily be there, but maybe just a page or something.
Yeah.
Where you would go to find out what it used to be like. Okay, that's the easy one. Then I have like a really difficult question. It's really more for the board, I guess. And for you, what you had in mind about. I understand they're just guidelines. I am not just guidelines. I understand they're guidelines. Are they to be referred to in the code? Are they, were you thinking about referring to them in the ARB section of the historic?
We haven't spoken about whether there needs to be some change in the ARB law.
In which event, that's what the public hearing should be on. I mean, because that, and it pulls it all together. But then the other part of that is, let's say, these are just guidelines, but let's say somebody comes in and they want to put new shutters on their house. They want to put vinyl shutters. No, these are real, and they're vinyl shutters that are hideous. Well, not necessarily hideous, but don't fit exactly right, but, and you want them to get wooden shutters that would fit the window if they close. How shutters are supposed to be. And so the ARB doesn't give them approval for it because it doesn't meet the guidelines. But their position is, and I know because I had custom ones made, it's about $1,000 a window, that said, I can't afford $1,500 a window or whatever. How does that work? So
That one's an easy one. I just said, just don't put the shutters on.
No, that's not being.
But where does it go from there?
Where does it go from there?
Well, and I had the same sort of thought. You were very careful to make these recommendations, not directives.
Right.
So what becomes compelling? So if somebody comes before the ARB and says, I want to put, purple aluminum siding on the whole house, that might be fairly easy. But when does this become prescriptive?
Well, the ARB has the power now and will continue to have the power to review and approve and say what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So this has less to do with taking that responsibility out of the ARB's hands and putting it in a document, and more to do with bringing everybody to the same plateau before the discussion starts.
Okay,
I
so
think
that everybody
that was
has-
always the intent, because writing it in a way that it has to be prescriptive is a very different document. It's a very different document, and it's a hard document. And there are documents that are more like that, but we just, there's still people in the way. There's, the ARB will be making decisions based on their expertise, based on their experience, and I think early on we decided that that's what we wanted to keep. And if the ARB says it's fine to do the pink vinyl siding or the vinyl shutters, if someone can make a compelling argument, I think leaving that open is actually a better condition than trying to, pull everything together.
Right, and I understood you started out by saying that. So basically, these are guidelines that will be considered both by the person wanting to do the renovation or whatever, and the same guidelines being informing the ARB's decisions. So it will be.
The ARB also has a lot of great language in it now, where it says the ARB will consider X.
Yeah,
Things like scale, or like I'm an architect, I don't even know what that means sometimes. So I think if the language of the ARB law changed to say the ARB will look at this, in addition to looking at other factors, I think that may be enough to give this a little bit of teeth, but not bind the ARB's hands because there's going to be conditions, I know, that the ARB is going to go, I don't want to do what it says here, because this is a different condition, and what you've shown us is better than what's shown here. Yeah. And you want to give them the freedom to say yes to that.
I suppose, Janice, that 90% of the time, it'll probably work out between the homeowner and the ARB. They'll be able to work it out. But I guess the odd situation is somebody who comes in and really wants to do something, and you don't approve that.
Doesn't that go to the ZBA?
Pardon?
Doesn't that then go to the ZBA if
It would.
you have to get
Well,
a variance?
it can.
Let's not go back there. We've been there already tonight.
But the decision would get reviewed by the ZBA. Then I think it does get a little tricky, but I think it might be another one of those situations where you have to see how it plays out.
And if I could just add one point, because it's an important point. The disadvantage the ARB is at now is that we're making decisions what is characteristic of the neighborhood or what's in keeping with the neighborhood. But because we have so much variety in our neighborhood with architectural styles, historical styles, we've often have had an applicant say, yeah, but the shutters are appropriate 5 doors down, but for this particular house, it's not appropriate. And we haven't been able to point to a document or explain to the applicant why for your house shutters are not are not appropriate, but 5 doors down it is. So the document really is just information that assists us in explaining to the applicant before they come in, but also when they're before us, why it's not appropriate to the neighborhood. But I think every decision, regardless of what's in the guidelines, will involve a balancing act, which we go through now. We're not going to be prescriptive, and we've talked about that on the ARB as well. It's why we have 2 architects specifically who are on our board who go into great detail when it's necessary why something's not appropriate to the building. This document will just be another source of information.
It's also true, however, that even though where there are guidelines, the history is that there's much more support for the board's decision.
Yeah.
So that at all levels of appeal, at the ZBA appeals of a preservation commission, if that's the process, and in court, that if you've given someone, put it online, instead of giving them fair warning that this is the bias, this is the solemn, considered consensus of the community, it's really got much more legs on appeal. So that it's part of building support for the ARB in the same way that the findings, having a logical and appropriate finding process does.
Mary Ann, I'm not sure that we've answered the question that came from you, or the comment that I thought was going to hardship case. And is that what you were?
Well, it's out there, and I'm just not sure how you deal with them. I think we have to assume that the ARB is going to be, reasonable, and
I think that, and that's been the history of the ARB so far. I
Right,
think
I know you
they'll
have-
take all that into account as
You've
they.
had very few, and there've been so few issues.
Right.
I don't remember two decisions, you know.
I mean, it's obviously in its format aimed at people who are thinking of making alterations, of buying a house here. I mean, if it's promoted on our website and it's very accessible to the public, I think as an educational foundation for all the process that follows, it's incredibly valuable for an applicant to have had all this background. And I think the ARB certainly appreciates being able to explain something to an applicant, but leaving the decision-making finally in the hands of individuals who have been selected and appointed by our board, this just strengthens and supports the role of the ARB in this whole complicated process. So I think, yes, I think we need the tweaks and the things that we've been talking about, but, you know, this is a committee of citizens who've given up a tremendous amount of time to sit here for all these years as well. This is public input already, and there'll be more public input, and I feel like we're on the right track.
I think, I'm not sure, I should maybe work with John or whatever to figure out
Or you can insert that.
where we should put this in and how we should put it in.
And
And
that should be
probably,
reviewed at the same time as this.
that's what I
Yes.
think that's really critical, is, okay, you've got these guidelines, but how do they
Yeah,
fit
that'll
in?
clear
And
up
I
any
think-
questions that people have in terms of
Right.
what role they play in the approval.
Yeah, and I probably, well, right now in the section, historic district section,
Right.
only deals with demolition, I think.
Right.
You know, it only deals with demolition, and this is what we were gonna get back to. So, in that section, but,
It's going to be
If
very
you
interesting
want-
wording about how,
you're not kidding.
yeah,
You
can't wait to debate this.
Easier, thought than written, but,
I always think it's probably the language we'll consider this.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's what, because
yeah.
that's, when other things would come up.
And I feel like we're
but
giving-
if it makes sense, I'll communicate
Yeah, I think that's great. I
with
think
John
that's
on
great.
this. We've had pretty good ones.
Because at the end of the day, we're not changing the ARB's job that we envisioned for them. We're just giving them a little bit more ammo.
Right.
Well thought out,
Clarity.
picture ammo.
Right.
The dream is, Deb, is that you'll have someone coming to you, like a homeowner, and saying like, well, I'm just trying to put the mountain centered on the modillion.
Exactly right.
And you'll be like, yes. So,
So as far as next step, I think, Mary Ann discussing with
Yeah, I think
John
that's
some
right.
of these factors makes sense to me, and having the ARB really review this carefully, and having the public aware that this is online already, and that there'll be a public hearing if anything becomes, goes further with this, so. I think a lot has been done. I really appreciate the work the committee has done, and Steve Tilley and Elizabeth, and appreciate their coming to chat with us tonight and hear our thoughts on this.
Steve
you all.
and his team have done a wonderful job. They probably haven't had as difficult a committee to work with.
Oh,
as
Earl,
ours.
speak.
I hope we didn't dampen their spirits.
You're here.
I see they're smiling, Earl.
It doesn't look like an angry smile.
They did a lot of great
No,
work.
we had a good dinner at Irvington. That's
Oh, I see. Okay.
No, it's a great committee, actually. It's really hardworking. and
Appreciate all the
clever
work that's gone into this. We know it definitely hasn't been easy, and trying to incorporate so many ideas into something that's tangible is always really hard, and the fact that it's as close as it is, I'm very pleasantly surprised. So great work.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, to be continued.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're here.
Trustee liaison reports. Mr. Gilliland.
I don't have anything new.
I like that. Happy August.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
I got nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. Nothing. Okay.
Fantastic. Wow, that's a record. Christina asked me to read about 7 pages. No, I'm kidding.
Read
Village
it online.
administrator is absent. He's on vacation.
Yeah.
You could just give him.
Yeah, I'm,
Larry?
oh, Larry, yes, Larry's on.
Although he's always on email, which is
Yes.
not
He's
good.
probably
I told him.
watching.
Well, he is. I hope he isn't.
You don't need me to
Larry, don't
spell
watch
it out after you.
I'm gonna look at it.
And village clerk, treasurer's report.
We're getting ready for our annual audit. It's going to be after Labor Day weekend. Also, I got some disappointing news from our bank. They're lowering the interest rate again.
What?
I know. I did speak with them last week in anticipation of the rate increase, and we're going to look at some alternatives like treasuries, and then they go to bid for other banks for some investment money. Because it's .07,
Oh, yeah.
so it's, it's just.
Keep it under the mattress for that kind of
Yeah.
interest rate.
Spend it.
Where's the thing? Almost $15 trillion worth of government debt is now negative
Yeah.
yielding.
God,
Which blows my mind.
yeah, no, it's amazing.
Yeah.
You think about that thing.
Point
So we're-
oh
at
seven.
least we're getting
We're
something.
talking- It's less than a tenth
Yeah,
of a percent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, but there's governments that are paying, you have to pay to have your money in
Right.
government bonds, so.
Yeah, I thought it
Anyway.
blows my mind, I know.
So good timing. Village attorney's report.
I don't have one.
Wow.
Having a good summer.
Public comment.
Oh, Mr. Lunky, no.
Review of action items.
You were just gonna look into that thing Brenda was
Right.
gonna look into.
There's another company
Yes.
we need
Yeah.
to see.
That's right.
Actually,
Good
when they gave me the rates, they were a little bit more than we have been paying. And the company we used before they were taking over had a little bit better rates in capital markets. So I did go back to them and they did reduce the rate on our,
Nice, well, that's good. So that's the only thing I have. And now we'll have a motion to adjourn. Got a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Why-